Today, I'm going to show you guys my top 10 favorite boss fights that we've gotten in Treyarch Zombies history. Boss fights have been on almost every single Zombies map since Black Ops 3, and they play a critical role in my opinion on how I feel about an Easter egg and even about the map as a whole. But before I begin my list, I do want to make a couple things clear. First of all, like I said, this is going to be Treyarch Zombies only, so Mephistopheles fans, I'm sorry, it will not be on here. Also, when I say boss fights, I mean boss fights. You have to be fighting against a particular enemy, so that means any lockdown or escort steps will not count, even though some may be on the same level of intensity as some bosses. That's not how I view them in my book. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get into the list, but before I get into my actual top 10, I do want to give a couple honorable mentions to some fights I was considering, but didn't quite make the cut. And the first honorable mention I'm going to give is the werewolf fight on Dead of the Night. This is a boss I wanted to give a bit more credit to, but when I look at this as a whole, there really isn't a lot going on here. It is definitely a lot of fun though. The arena is cool and open, the fight flows somewhat nicely, and it is very easy to do. It's mainly just a bunch of statue turning and trying to trap the werewolf to kill him. There's really not too much going on, but I still considered it for the list. And the second and final honorable mention is going to go to the Forsaken boss fight on Forsaken. I think that this is a great boss fight to wrap up the Cold War storyline, ending on relatively higher stakes than some prior bosses anyway. I find myself having the same thoughts about this fight as I did with the werewolf boss. There just isn't that much going on here, and while I don't have too many critiques about the fight itself, I also don't have anything that amazing to say about it. One thing that I do like about this boss that others don't really have is the little intermission where it shows the crew dead with the Maxis graffiti on the wall. That was something unique and exciting I could say about it, but that's really it. So that's going to do it for the honorable mentions. Now it's time to get into the real top 10 list. Kicking things off at the number 10 spot is going to be the Sentinel Artifact boss fight from the Tomb, and this one may come as a shocker to a lot of you out there, and before you all start yelling at the screen and typing your hate comments, let me explain. I think a large part as to why this fight made it this high is due to recency bias. That's tough to ignore, and I can guarantee that is the biggest reason why it is here on this list. We'll see how this turns out in several months, especially when we see new fights. I've got my nitpicks and critiques with the fight, but for some reason I keep finding myself coming back to it every now and then. I don't even really know why, but from my experience, this boss is very replayable. The main critiques I see with this fight are the elite enemies that initially were able to one-shot you, but of course those were fixed with patches, so they're not really an issue anymore, and the fact that the boss feels bullet spongy, which I haven't had that feeling as much as other people have, but I do understand it. The main issue I have is that even though the boss arena looks cool, there are a lot of things on the ground that you can get stuck on, and that has caused me to die in this fight so many times. Too many times to the point where it is annoying. Initially, when the map launched, I didn't like the fight that much just for that reason. But of course, as time went on, I was able to deal with it and become much better with strategy and all that stuff, so in other words, it grew on me. But I genuinely respect how different this fight is compared to the high stakes, giant creatures we fought in BO6 already. I find it fun to play, and the music is a banger. The soundtrack really elevates this entire fight, but especially the last half where you're going against the elite enemies, so shout out Treyarch sound team, they never miss. So yeah, this may change in the future, but right now, I've got it at the number 10 spot. Coming in at the number 9 spot is Legion from Outbreak. I feel like a good majority of us remember dying over and over and over and over again at launch, because if you remember, this was a very challenging boss at launch. If I remember correctly, this fight was plagued with super sprinters and strong enemies while you had to deal with the boss itself and the 10-minute timer, but of course, it was mostly nerfed and is now not as difficult, but the excitement was fun while it lasted. Even after the patches, this still remains a top 10 boss, at least in my eyes. I love the scale of this fight. It was such a nice change of pace for Cold War in which we really weren't getting that. And the design of the boss itself is very cool as well. I know it's just a giant tempest, but it still looks awesome. And I like the fact that the boss poses himself as a threat rather than relying on the enemies to do most of the work. If there was anything that I wish were different, I would say that I would prefer a better arena rather than it just being the Ruka missile silos. Also, I would remove the timer. I genuinely don't believe that should be there. Overall, this may have been annoyingly challenging at launch, but it was so needed for Cold War at the time, and it still remains really good, and that's why it is in the number 9 spot. And coming in at the number 8 spot is going to be Valentina from Mauer der Toten. Well, look at Cold War go. The map right after Outbreak produces a boss fight that, in my opinion, I think slightly ups it. And on top of that, it's a similar scenario to Outbreak where Cold War desperately needed a solid boss fight like this. I find this fight to be somewhat similar to the Shadow Man fights on Shadows and Revelations in the sense of the boss has a shield, you break the shield, you inflict damage, rinse and repeat. However, the difference is that the boss itself has a lot more attacks, including a wipe attack in which if you don't avoid it, you are dead. Which means that the boss poses a threat while also having enemies come after you, which is exactly the blueprint you want. I also like how different the attacks are. You have a wipe attack, you have a ranged attack that drains your armor, you have the boss send enemies after you, and the boss can even heal herself. And the reason I like it so much is because it forces the player to keep an eye on the boss to see what she is going to do next. I also think it's cool that this fight takes you to different areas of the map. I always like it when a boss fight does that. And then of course you get the amazing moment after the fight in which our Lord and Savior Klaus walks into the portal and we have to defend him. Such a great climax to the Easter egg, and it rightfully deserves the number 8 spot. And coming in at the number 7 spot is going to be Pegasus and Perseus from Ancient Evil. I mean, there's just no way I couldn't put this in the top 10. You are literally fighting mythological creatures on Mount Olympus. That concept alone earns a place up here. This is eerily similar to the Gorod fight, mainly because you are fighting 2 enemies, but also just in terms of the scale of everything. The main thing I like about this fight is the way it forces you to use the gauntlets and even your specialist weapon. And not only that, the game gives you a way to charge up your specialist. You know how tedious this would be if there was no way to replenish our specialist weapons without killing zombies? Personally, I'm pretty grateful for that. Don't know about you guys, but you also need to use your gauntlet to shoot Pegasus out of the sky, and you could technically do it without it, but the gauntlets are much more convenient. Also, the music is really good here as well, and you'll probably hear me praising the music a lot in this, but it deserves it. The soundtrack really adds to the flavor and experience of this boss. The one thing I will critique about this fight is the Perseus side. I feel like he should have been stronger and more intimidating, especially considering the fact he is a demigod, but I find more stress and pressure when I'm facing a flying horse rather than a half-god, and I just wish that wasn't the case. But of course, this is still a dope boss fight, and it respectfully earns the number 7 spot. Coming in at the number 6 spot is going to be Fury and Wrath from 9. I love Black Ops 4 boss fights, man. I just love how much they play around with different pieces of history and mythology and actually go for it with these fights. I mean, you are literally going up against Roman elephants in the middle of the Roman Colosseum. I mean, imagine saying that to someone in 2008. There's a lot to like with the boss fight on 9, but I'm going to say something that I haven't really said for previous bosses, and it's the fact that this fight has such a great progression. I love how the boss escalates from enemies running out of the darkness, to the first elephant coming out, to the surprise second elephant, and getting that increase in difficulty. I feel like it should be the formula for most boss fights, and that's why I appreciate what 9 did. Also, I think it goes without saying, but the arena is huge. There's so much open space, and it is so cool. Like I said, it is a literal Roman Colosseum. I do also appreciate the fact that we can rely on more weapons rather than just the Hellion Salvo. Now, obviously, having the Hellion makes it much more convenient, but it's still not that bad without it. You could probably make an entire video about this boss and all the great things it does, so it more than deserves the number 6 spot. Kicking off the top 5, we've got the Eye of Odin from Voyage of Despair. I'm going to say a lot of things that I said for the previous boss fights to complement this one, but I also really like the progression of this one. It's a fairly weak and easy first 2 stages while the eye just sits back and watches with its eye. Then in the 3rd and 4th stages, the boss actually makes itself known and starts firing lasers at you, and you are now forced to attack it in pretty claustrophobic settings. And finally, the boss gets a wipe attack that can take out your entire team in the last phase, so the escalation in difficulty also exists in this boss fight. On top of that, I do like the fact that it takes you to different areas of the ship during the phases. You could be given more open spaces or very closed off spaces where it's much harder to focus on the boss and kill enemies at the same time. And I also have to praise, you guessed it, the music to this fight. It adds a new level of intensity to it that makes this boss much more memorable on top of everything else that I have already mentioned. But the only issue I have with this fight is the same critique that other people have given it, and that is the over-reliance on the Hellion Salvo. Of course, it is possible to do this without the Hellion, but its usage makes it so easy to the point where it feels like a necessity, and I'm not the biggest fan of that. But either way, this is still an incredible fight, and I absolutely love doing it, and I think that this was a great one to kick off the top 5. And coming in at the number 4 spot is going to be the Guardian from Citadel des Morts. Well, who would have thunk it? But this is basically the equivalent to a dime store Dark Souls boss fight in Call of Duty Zombies, which is crazy that those words are coming from my mouth right now. But that's basically what this is, and it's even more impressive that this boss fight had this much gravitas when we knew just from the marketing what this boss was going to be. The fact that it managed to still be surprising and amazing is beyond me. Similar to Ancient Evil, I really like the way this utilizes your weapons and even the swords. With the buffs in that update, you could just go into Aether Shroud and melee his armor off to expose his weak points, and so all of your weapons are playing a part. I also like that he has a lot of different attacks that you can learn to master. Whether it's ranged attacks or close-up attacks, you need to really learn your surroundings and what you need to do. It definitely challenges your skills in some ways. And of course, the boss arena, the music, the visuals of it all are amazing and really add up to a legendary boss fight. Legendary to the point where I think the number 4 spot is the perfect place for it. To start off my top 3, I've got the Dragon and Nikolai fight on Gorod Krovi. If there is any boss fight in Treyarch Zombies history, the community has collectively come together to say, hey, this boss fight is incredible. It's Gorod Krovi. You're literally fighting a dragon and a mech. Even for BO3 standards, this was pretty amazing. Having 2 bosses is one thing, but it's another if you're able to make both of them feel grand in scale. And that's exactly what this fight does, as a dragon is raining fire at you and Nikolai is gunning you down with a minigun or deploying wraps at you. There is so much happening in this boss fight. And on top of that, it's a pretty challenging boss fight as well. I don't find the fight with the dragon that difficult, but when you're fighting Nikolai, you have to be very precise when shooting his weak points while you are running from his missiles and everything else he is throwing at you. When you're dealing with enemies this big, you need an arena where you can just run, and that's exactly what it gives you here. There's a reason so many people love this boss fight so much, and everything just culminates together to create an epic finale to this map. But there are just 2 bosses that I find slightly better than this one, so Gorod will rest gently here at the number 3 spot. The penultimate pick is going to go to Patient 13 from Terminus. Without sugarcoating anything, I'll just say this boss absolutely rocks, and boy are we thankful that Terminus delivered on its Easter egg and boss fight especially. There was a lot of hype surrounding this, and it still managed to be incredible. Similar to a lot of these recent bosses I've talked about, the scale of this boss fight is huge. And it's not even just from the boss itself, it's everything going on around you. The arena is big, there's so many zombies and elites, tentacles shooting things at you, and then of course the Kraken itself. There is a lot happening here. Attacking the boss is fairly simple, you just shoot its weak points, but the threat it poses more than makes up for it. So many different attacks, including a slam attack, pull attack, and of course the dreaded wipe attack. I think each phase is threatening for different reasons. I really like the visuals of the boss as it morphs and the different attacks it gains, and the different methods the player needs to go about killing it. And, I just gotta say it, the music is absolutely amazing. The entire time, just elevating every single ounce of this fight, and it all just bakes so well together into another legendary boss fight. So Terminus will rest here at the number 2 spot, and it is now time for the number 1 pick. My favorite Treyarch Zombies boss fight is the Corrupted Keeper from Der Eisendrache. This boss right here is the culmination of all of the amazing things I have said about the previous fights, as well as the incredible memories I have made completing this. There is a great utilization of the elemental bows as well as the Ragnaroks, and it requires the player to know what they're doing in order to complete it. They also need a decent amount of skill if they want to survive the wave of Panzers, or they will just end the game due to their PTSD from Origins. Who knows? And this was basically the first time a wipe attack was introduced as a boss fight mechanic, so the amount of people that were surprised or raged from instant downing to the electricity was extreme. The arena is so dark and ominous and different, and I absolutely love it. The boss overall is so well designed, and it keeps you moving the entire time because you're avoiding skeletons, volcanoes, skulls, and hellhounds. Now, I will not hide this from you. This pick is definitely very nostalgia driven, but to be honest, can you really blame me? The amount of memories I've made completing this boss and carrying others through it are insane. Also, the first time I completed this, it still remains one of my favorite moments I've had on this game franchise. So, I'm willing to combine my personal experience playing this with the fact that this boss fight is absolutely amazing, and that is why this is in the #1 spot. But let me know what you guys think. Feel free to let me know what your favorite boss fight is or what your top 10 list is. You can leave it down in the comments. Do whatever you'd like. I would love to see your takes. That's going to do it for this video. Thank you so much for watching. Please be sure to leave a like on the video if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and hit the notification bell to stay notified for other videos and streams that I do on the channel. And I'll see you guys in the next one.